Aloha, welcome back to The Whole Gamut. I'm your host, Hillary Weinberg, here today with Professor Tamara Albertini from the University of Hawaii, and she is a professor of philosophy and also is the chair of the Certificate for Islamic Studies. I'm really excited to have her on the show today because with all the talk in the mainstream media about Muslims and Islam and the wars in the Middle East, we don't really hear about the great things about that part of the world, and that's what she's here today to talk about. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk, yes, about positive things happening in the Islamic world, and in particular about Tunisia. Tunisia is the country where the Arab Spring was born, and it looks like it's the country where that spring is still blossoming and blooming despite many, many challenges.
So where do we even start? You grew up in Tunisia. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
My father was in the hotel management business, and I was invited to introduce tourism to Tunisia. So that's what took the entire family there in the late 60s. We stayed 10 years instead of the 2 years that were originally projected. I went to public schools. I lived like a Tunisian in many ways and spoke Tunisian dialect on a daily basis. That was my world for 10 years.
And where did your family move after that?
Then we went back to Switzerland, where my father continued his career, and I had a very hard time adapting to Swiss ways.
Of course. So what makes Tunisia special? What's different about Tunisia?
Tunisia has a very rich and very long history that the population is aware about. You see, you go to places like, let's say, Egypt or Syria or Jordan, and those are, of course, also places where there have been major ancient civilizations. But the population at large is not necessarily aware of that history. Tunisia is very different. Tunisia is the Arab country with the highest percentage of literacy, the highest percentage of people with high school diplomas, and of course, also the country with the highest percentage of university graduates. And that makes a big difference. You see, if you look at currency in Tunisia, don't be surprised to find Hannibal on one of the notes used on a daily basis, and people just think Hannibal is their hero.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
That's so interesting. So let's talk about a little bit about Tunisian history, starting from the beginning. So who are the original people of Tunisia? Can we even say there are any original people of Tunisia? And you've talked a little bit about the history. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so you have an original population of North Africa, so not just Tunisia. They are called the Kabyles. Don't call them Berbers. Not a good idea, because you can tell it's rather insulting, right? So they're Kabyles. They were there when the Carthaginians showed up and built up, their city, Carthago. They were still there when the Romans came and the Vandals and many more populations. Tunisia has a minority of Kabyle-speaking people. Everybody is aware of their Kabyle roots, but it's only in the south and remote areas where people still speak their original language. But a lot of Kabyle words has been preserved in Tunisian Arabic. So people may use Kabyle words and not even be aware of it.
Mm-hmm. So after the Kabyles, who was in charge of Tunisia? I mean, it's so multicultural. I mean, you've talked a little bit about that before.
I think Tunisia was multicultural right in the beginning. It had its original, native roots, but it also had Carthaginian and Greek influence. Then Roman influence. Roman influence is probably the one that lasted longest. If you go to the Bardo Museum, it's a jewel. It's one of the most beautiful museums in the world. It has the largest collection of Roman mosaics. And you can tell from the stories told in those mosaics that the population of North Africa really capitalized on ancient Greek and ancient Roman stories that happened on their own soil. So of course you'll have a Queen Dido, the Carthaginian queen, being part of the many stories told in mosaic pictures. But then, it goes on till the 7th century when Tunisia was still Byzantine territory. Let's face it, Byzantine Empire, that's Eastern Rome. When I was a child, I remember going with my father somewhere in the countryside, and we met a Bedouin. And the Bedouin asked my father, "Are you a Rumi?" Which means, "Are you a Roman?" It's kind of incredible that in the 20th century, the word Roman is still being used to describe someone who is from Europe.
Oh, wow, that's
yes.
so interesting.
So after that came the Arab troops, as a famous Arab general, Uqba ibn Nafi, who definitely Islamicized and Arabized North Africa. Tunisians have mixed feelings about that person. There is an Islamist group, a militant group, that adopted the name Uqba ibn Nafi. Very educated Tunisians resent that. They said, no, that is not the best of Islamic culture. We don't want to go back to that period, and we don't want to have references to that period. Instead, Tunisians today have found a way to integrate all their elements, all their historic ingredients, if you will, and they make it their own. And then in the end, what they say is, well, that is what makes us Tunisian. We are not just Arabs, we are not just Muslims, we have so much more in our tradition. Jewish communities were very dear to Tunisians. There are not many left in Tunisia today, but there is a strong community on the island of Djerba in the south of Tunisia. Their synagogue goes back to the 5th century BC. It's the oldest Jewish community in the Mediterranean area. So when you go to the synagogue in Tunis, of course today heavily guarded, but people really feel it's part of their own heritage. I think that's what makes Tunisians so special. They are Tunisians first, and they understand to be a Tunisian means many things. On my blog, I have a photograph of a woman, holding a message, and it says something like, if you're Muslim, if you're Jewish, if you're secularist, if you're atheist, if you're religious, if you're Arab, and you love Tunisia, that makes you Tunisian.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we tend to think of the Arab world as homogeneous, that there's not much difference between the countries, that it's all backward and not very, not backwards, that's not quite the word, but in the media it's really portrayed as this dangerous place.
Right.
It's not portrayed as this place of blossoming intellect and rich history and culture and art. I mean, for me, the art is what brought me into the Middle East. The art and the poetry of Rumi, that's what pulled me into this region of the world.
Arts and poetry, I think that's the best way to first talk about any Islamic country. You see, in Islamic countries, children start very early on to do their calligraphy, to do ornamentation. There is a blank page. It doesn't stay blank for very long. Muslims love to do ornamentations, to use any little space on a page and add something to it. It could be calligraphy, it could be arabesque, it could be geometry. It's all over. Muslims cherish their poets. They know their poetry by heart. They compete with each other. Who knows the more verses. Lots of competitions among modern poets, contemporary poets today. People go on TV and watch it with fascination, in awe. Their poets are treated like rock stars, and that's the part that we never hear about.
And it's interesting because in the United States, we tend to view ourselves as the center of culture. There's a lot of so-called soft power in the world where American culture has, pervaded the rest of the world, but there's some parts of American culture that we don't value so deeply. I mean, we don't, value poets. Maybe rock stars,
right?
Maybe people who are lyricists, but poets, we don't give them fame and fortune and the renown that maybe we should, as well as artists. I mean, maybe there's a few in the artistic community is very, different, separate from the general population. But art is considered this thing that's out of reach for the general population.
I think, you're touching upon something very important. There is no such thing as an elite art in Islamic countries. You see, everybody is into everybody's art. Calligraphy is something appreciated by everyone. They have incredible singers in the Arab world, men and women. They too are treated with the utmost respect, and everybody listens to them. Whether you are a street vendor, with a little radio tucked inside your turban, or whether you can listen to music at home and have the best sound quality, that is not a difference. Everybody shares everybody's art. Of course, now there is also pop music in the Arab world, and I'm not sure whether everybody listens to that. That's more like a new phenomenon that the young people enjoy. But other than that, it's not like in Western countries where opera is for a certain type of people and then rock for another type. There isn't that strong division.
So how is not the Middle East as a whole, but mostly Tunisia, how has Tunisia changed since the beginning of the Arab Spring?
Tunisia is doing a lot of soul searching. You see, on one hand, there is great pride because, the story is it took one street vendor called Bouazizi who self-immolated, and then all of a sudden a revolution started, and 10 days later the dictator who seemed to be so powerful stepped down. Nobody expected that he would leave the country so soon. That was Ben Ali. And then came for the first time free elections. Tunisia never had free elections. They had a very benign dictator in 1956 when the country became independent from France. He did a lot of good things. He was something like the Ataturk of Tunisia. So like the leader of Turkey, he had this idea of modernizing, secularizing, women without veil, education for all, and so forth. But he never allowed free elections. So this happened only in 2011, very, very recently. Imagine, only 4 years ago. And what happened is that the country that was, the party that was best organized, that was the Nahda party. Nahda means Renaissance. It's an Islamist party, not militant, but Islamist. They won because they were the only ones who really got ready for it in all those years when Ben Ali, the dictator, was still in power. They were challenged, and something extraordinary happened. The Nahda party stepped down in 2013 because they could tell it was going to be a major danger for the country. It could have brought civil war. They stepped down and said, no, it's more important for the country to remain stable.
Oh, wow.
And then again, new elections happened, and a new founded party won, and President Essebsi, who is the founder of that party, now governs Tunisia. So all of this is very new. You see, when you come from a Western setting where democracy is much older, I come from Switzerland. We pride ourselves thinking of ourselves as having reinvented democracy 700 years ago. But this happened just a few years ago. It's still very fragile, very volatile. Think about Spain right now. I mean, they just had an election, and it's a big debate now as to what is going to happen next, since the party with the largest percentage does not have the majority. And even countries in Europe are very, very much challenged by situations like that. So what to say about a country like Tunisia that doesn't have the historic experience? But what Tunisia does have is an incredible will to make it work. And I see that will represented on all sides, whether they are secularists or Islamists. I think for most of them, the agenda is the country, Tunisia, has to be saved.
This is also interesting. I'm so glad you're here. We have to cut to a commercial break really quickly. We'll be right back.
Aloha! Hello, my name is Patrick Bratton. I'm host of Global Connections here at ThinkTech Hawaii. We broadcast live every Thursday at 1 p.m. We bring Hawaii to the world and the world to Hawaii, talking about international events and various things of interest to the audience. Please join me. I look forward to talking with you and having you get to meet some of my guests. Aloha.
Mahalo for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. We are a channel dedicated to raising public awareness about the importance of technology, energy, diversification, and globalism to the future of Hawaii. We broadcast and stream daily from 1 to 5 every weekday, and we broadcast on Olelo 54 and OC16 TV. All of our shows are archived on thinktechhawaii.com, and we hope to see you there. Aloha.
Aloha! How you doing? It's me, Angus McTech. Wishing you to welcome and join us to see us on Hibachi Talk on Think Tech Hawaii. Join my co-hosts, Gordo the Tech Czar and Andrew the Security Guy, every Friday from 1300 to 1345. We look forward to seeing you. We'll talk tech and we'll have some wee bit of fun. And remember, let your wing gang free wherever you be. Aloha!
Yeah.
Welcome back to Think Tech Hawaii. I'm Hillary Weinberg, your host, and I'm here with Professor Tamara Albertini at UH Hawaii. We're talking about Tunisia, where the professor grew up, and she is also the chair of the Certificate for Islamic Studies at UH. And so I'm really excited to have her here, especially have a philosopher's perspective on the Middle East, because we're so often looking at it from a political perspective or a military perspective.
That's right. And you know, something that we just have to acknowledge in the United States and also in Europe is that intellectuals in the Islamic world are not sitting idly. They work very hard and they take a lot of risks. You see, any major university in the last few years has been under attack by various Islamist factions. And it's always intellectuals, professors and their students who, in the end, save their university. And I don't mean just saving, you know, the buildings. I really mean saving the mission of any university, which is about inquiry, which is about tolerance, which is about sharing information, transparency, freedom, human rights. Intellectuals are very, very busy in the Islamic world. I'm in touch with a number of philosophers at the University of Tunis, and I'm amazed at all they've done in the last few years. I mean, they had situations where militants entered their classrooms and wanted to impose the segregation between the sexes. And professors just said, no, we're not going to do that. We teach men and women. They wanted to blackmail the dean at the University of Tunis. They actually locked him up in his office to create new courses again, separate for men and for women. And he refused to do that. So we have hundreds, thousands of intellectuals all being very vigilant. Some of them have become politicians. I know of Maya Jbiri. She's the leader of the Republican Party in Tunisia. She's the only woman who is the leader of a party in the Arab world. She personally worked on redrafting the constitution. And it is partly thanks to her that the language of the equality between the sexes was preserved in the Constitution. Islamists wanted to have complementarity between the sexes. But you see, when you have an educated country with many very vigilant intellectuals, there is a way to stop whatever can be a great disadvantage to women and minorities.
You know, that's so interesting. In the United States, of course, we have a very vibrant intellectual community here,
Yes.
but our stakes are so much lower. You know, and it's so interesting because there's a lot of discussion around right now in U.S. media, safe spaces and colleges, and this, you know, idea of, you know, we shouldn't talk about things that will upset students. But I mean, personally, it feels like, but the point of universities is to challenge, is to do something dangerous, is to feel a little bit uncomfortable and have to defend yourself.
Right. And you know, we have a new program now at UH, or rather UH has joined a pre-existing program for scholars at risk. So we'll be able to invite Arab Muslim intellectuals to come and teach at UH so that they would have an additional forum, so that they would form partnerships with American intellectuals. Because you see, if your fight is a lonely fight that is only relevant to your own part of the world, that's not enough. You do want to go global, and I think there is a great responsibility that comes to us intellectuals in the West. We do have to support our colleagues in the Arab world, in many other places of the world.
Absolutely. And so how do you think the resurgence of ISIS and, you know, this terrorism and how it's just growing and growing, how are people in Tunisia reacting to it? And is ISIS spreading to that part of the world? Is it staying, you know, but, you know, not even just looking at ISIS, Boko Haram coming from the south of Tunisia. Is terrorism growing? How do the Tunisian people feel about it, and what are their responses?
Tunisians are terrified. I was in Tunisia in the summer when the attacks on the tourists in Sousse happened. And at first I thought, wow, I mean, how did I get my timing? You know, why am I there exactly in a moment like that? But eventually I thought it gave me an advantage to just do my own observations firsthand. And what I saw was a country that was devastated. I saw Tunisians of all walks of life becoming very, very reflective. And it was all about how do we save our country. That something like that could happen was really sending out the message to all Tunisians that it had become very critical. And unless they all united and fought terrorism together, they could lose their country. There were Tunisians who said, well, we're going to be like Libya, or who said, they're going to be like Syria and fall apart. I do not think Tunisia will fall apart. Tunisia has a rather homogeneous population. It's not tribal territory. Libya was always tribal territory. So when Gaddafi was removed, the major tribes took over, and each one of them wanted to have their original territory back. That is not going to happen to Tunisia. So it's a great chance right there. You know, what Tunisians understand is that this is something they cannot fight alone. And that was the first reaction, actually, that their president sent out after the attacks in Sousse, which is they'll do everything possible. But the world has to understand that these attacks were not planned on Tunisian territory. They were planned somewhere else. And Tunisia just doesn't have the capability to fight it on their own. So it is a great danger and a great risk. And I think Tunisians are aware of it.
Absolutely. You know, it's so interesting. You know, I was coming a few weeks after the attacks in Paris, and what I really loved when I was reading your blog, where she wrote this wonderful blog on these posts about her experience going back to Tunisia after several decades of being away. And you said people in Tunisia were coming up to you and saying, these are not Tunisians. These people, maybe they grew up in Tunisia, but we do not view them as Tunisians anymore. They are outsiders because a Tunisian wouldn't do this.
Right.
And it's interesting because that idea of an outsider coming in and attacking is the same idea of, in the Western world, where outsiders who happen to be Muslim are coming in and attacking. But they're still attacking the same values. And people in both places still view them as, it was just like an interesting dynamic and an interesting kind of thought experiment about it.
Which is why whenever there are pictures taken in Tunisia, you'll see a lot of Tunisian flags. There's Tunisian flags everywhere. People even drape themselves with their flags. And it's a way for them to tell the world, we are Tunisians and we are Tunisians first. Because see, the alternative, if you're let's say, a militant Islamist, is that you put some very abstract entity called the Ummah, the community of the believers. You put that first. And what it does is that you lose the care for the country in which you were born, in which you live, because you put something that's not pertaining to your part of the world higher. And I see Tunisians very careful about not doing that, about not giving power to elements who would put a very abstract entity higher than their own country. And the other thing that I saw is that at first I just kept hearing this word, which says in Tunisian dialect, ikhwanjia. It's a kind of a pejorative word for brothers. And it didn't take long, and I understood they were referring to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. So I asked, so what do you mean this person is ikhwanjia and the other person is ikhwanjia? So what I was explained is that there is a salafiyyah movement in Tunisia today. I was very intrigued by that because you see, everybody uses the word, but not many people really know what salafiyyah is.
Yeah, can you explain that to us a little bit?
Basically, Salafi means predecessors, ancestors. The way how I see it is we have to distinguish between two Salafiyyah waves. There is the original Salafiyyah that started in the 19th century in Egypt. It was a reformist movement. There was no militancy. There was no violence. It was all about the Muslim world, and in particular the Arab world, has to find out how to assert itself culturally, scientifically, in the community of nations. It was all about the world has changed so much, and we haven't been part of that. How are we going to modernize? What does it mean to modernize? But most importantly, the first Salafiyyah was an effort to change and bring about change, but in a way that is compatible with Islamic culture and Islamic values. Unfortunately, that first Salafiyyah never had a chance to really develop and blossom. Instead, a second wave came much, much later that was infiltrated by militants. And that second Salafiyyah is the one whose actions we hear about and see on our TV screens. And we are seeing a situation where the original message is lost, but it's not lost to Tunisians. Tunisia, religious movements in Tunisia try very hard to reattach themselves to that original Salafiyyah, reformist and modernized.
And this is interesting because in the United States today, we see that same push and pull of how do we modernize, what's happening to our traditional values, what does this mean for the family? What does this mean for religion? What does this mean for the white culture? And it's, in our country, it has, in some ways, and a lot of people believe, gone too far. Modernization has gone too far. We've strayed from our values. And it's interesting because the Muslim world is going through this type of intellectual, cultural revolution a little bit later than we are in the United States, but they're having different results. And they're coming upon militancy as a block. Whereas in the United States and the Western world, we had militancy, but it was just different. It evolved in a different way.
You're right. We have the same discussions at home as well. But still, whatever comes with modernization did come with the Western world. But when modernization is being discussed in an Islamic country, in particular now in Tunisia, the understanding is really clear. Let's say technology. Technology is not neutral. We tend to think of it being objective and serving the purposes of everyone. Easy to make a case with medicine. But technology is not neutral. Technology is in itself a carrier of a certain worldview. And many parts of the world, it isn't just the Arab world, are absolutely right. They say, well, let's not rush into it. Because if we rush into it, if we just let it happen, modernization becomes a new way of colonization. And
wow.
that is a response that I think needs to be understood. It's not about stopping modernization. It's just saying, can we do this on our own terms? Give us time. Give us time to digest and make it our own. And I think what happens in many parts of the Islamic world today, not only in Tunisia, is a sense in which various political groups and cultural movements and other organizations want to sit down and kind of negotiate, or what I call do a communal effort to reimagine Islam. Islam that is not a tool of oppression, Islam that is not accompanied by violence, but Islam that says we have been a vibrant civilization in the past and we can be that again. That, I think, is what's happening in many places.
That's so powerful. And what they're saying is, we don't necessarily want progress for the sake of progress.
That's right.
And that's a discussion that we have in the United States.
Right.
But sometimes we allow progress for the sake of progress. And, when you have talks about clones and different scientific breakthroughs and, drone technology and all these different things,
Right.
we go, hold on a second. We need our ethics to catch up with the technology that we have.
That's right.
And they're having these same conversations. People are having the same conversations all over the world. It's just a different way of approaching it.
Right.
And unfortunately, we're running out of time. But, and we're so glad that you came on the show today. What's the message you have for us? If someone wants to learn more about this country, what resources are there? And, if there's something you want to leave with the show, what would you like to say?
Well, it takes a lot of support inside and outside the country. I think the international community has done a lot to support Tunisia. They got the major prizes. The street vendor who self-immolated got the Sakharov Prize posthumously. The leader of the Nahda party, Rashid al-Ghanouchi, got the Averroes Prize. 4 organizations who saved the country from civil war got the Nobel Peace Prize. Wow. So I think for once, the international community is right on, and we are just, we just need to make sure that this continues.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you for being on the show, and thank you for tuning in. See you next time.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel of ThinkTech Hawaii. Won't you consider helping ThinkTech? We're a 501c3 Hawaii nonprofit corporation, now in our 15th year. Our model and very existence depends on ongoing contributions from our underwriters. We are very appreciative for their support. We're hoping you will consider becoming one of our ThinkTech underwriters. Unless our underwriters prefer to be anonymous, we publicize them on thinktechhawaii.com and on our daily email program sent to some 7,500 subscribers, our live stream talk shows, and our OC16 productions. With help from our underwriters, we have developed a high-tech video studio in Pioneer Plaza, and we now live stream 25 talk shows per week, covering science, tech, energy diversification, community, sustainability, and globalism for Hawaii. And we stream our earlier shows all night long. Our live stream is on thinktechhawaii.com. Check it out. We also upload all our shows to youtube.com, where we get 18,000 views per month. And we broadcast 12 hours per week on